The wolf was bleeding again. 3 handlers lay flat on the wet courtyard stone, and nobody else was moving toward that enclosure. Rain hit the metal bars so hard it sounded like gunfire. The eastern wing of Blackfang Estate had gone completely still. Guards lined the outer wall with weapons drawn. None of them stepped forward. None of them were stupid enough. Nick stood at the center of his steel cage, chest heaving, black fur matted against open wounds. 6 feet of predator and rage. His yellow eyes swept the courtyard the way a king surveys land he already owns. 2 handlers were unconscious. One was crawling toward the gate with a broken arm, leaving a dragged mark of blood across wet stone. The security chief's voice came through the radio, tight and clipped. "Nobody approaches. We wait for Lord Draeven." Vaelor Draeven didn't come running. He walked. Dark suit. No umbrella. Rain soaking into expensive fabric like it owed him nothing. He stopped 10 feet from the enclosure and stared at Nyx without blinking. The wolf stared back. That was the only relationship in Blackfang that worked without threats. Then the side gate opened. 2 guards dragged someone in. Not a handler. Not a physician. A man. Thin. Young. Wrists bound with rope that had already cut into the skin. Torn shoes. Muddy clothes. His head was down, dark hair plastered to his face from the rain. He'd been found near the eastern perimeter. Trespassing, they said? Or running? Nobody had gotten a straight answer because the man had not said a single word. Not one. The guard captain made the call fast. Lord Draeven. He was near the wolf's supply gate. Could be connected. Vaelor looked at the stranger once. Cold assessment. The kind that took 3 seconds and usually ended careers. Put him inside. The courtyard erupted in whispers. A guard grabbed the bound man by the collar. Inside the enclosure? Vaelor said nothing else. That was answer enough. The gate swung open. The bound man stumbled in. The rope around his wrist caught on the latch and he went down on one knee in the mud, directly in front of Nyx. Every weapon in the courtyard rose. Nyx lowered his head. Not to strike. Slowly. Carefully. Like something heavy had been pressing on him for a long time and suddenly lifted. The wolf moved across the enclosure, not charging, not circling. Just moving, one deliberate step at a time, until his massive head was inches from the stranger's face. The bound man lifted his eyes. His hands were shaking. His breathing was shallow. But he didn't flinch. He didn't squeeze his eyes shut or turn away. He just looked at Nyx directly. Like he understood something the rest of the courtyard couldn't hear. Then he raised his bound hands slowly. And placed them against the wolf's blood-matted fur. Nyx exhaled. Heavy. Long. The kind of breath something releases when it has been holding on too tight for too long. The wolf lowered his full weight until his head rested against the stranger's chest. Nobody spoke. Not for a long time. Vaelor's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from the wolf to the stranger and stayed there. The stranger's hands were moving gently through Nyx's fur. Slowly. Methodically. Not performing calm, actually feeling. Then his fingers stopped at one spot, just below the left shoulder. He parted the fur carefully. The courtyard couldn't see what he found. But his expression changed. His eyes lifted to Vaelor's face directly. Steady. Unafraid. He pressed 2 fingers against a small patch of skin on the wolf's side, then held those fingers up toward the light. They were damp with something that wasn't blood. Vaelor crossed the courtyard in 8 steps. He crouched down, looked at what the stranger was showing him, and went completely still. Fresh needle marks. Clustered. Deliberate. The rain kept falling. Hi viewers, have you ever watched someone trust an animal with their life, and somehow the animal knew to trust them back? Nobody outside the cage had moved. The security chief was gripping his radio so hard the plastic was cracking. One guard had not blinked in 40 seconds. Vaelor rose to his full height. His voice came out quiet. The kind of quiet that meant everyone nearby should start reconsidering their choices. Either the wolf recognizes you. He looked at the stranger's face one more time. Or someone inside this estate wants us both dead. They gave him a room near the eastern wing. No one asked his name. No one explained the rules. A servant dropped a folded set of clothes outside the door and knocked twice without waiting. That was the full welcome. Kaien Vael sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. Rain again. Or still. He wasn't sure how long he'd been inside the estate. Time moved differently when everything around you felt like a held breath. The room was small but clean. Iron bed frame. One lamp. A narrow closet with a broken latch. Outside the window, the eastern courtyard sat empty except for the steel enclosure and the sound of Nick's breathing in the dark. He could hear him from here. That mattered more than the room. The mansion itself was the kind of place that spent money the way some people use silence. Deliberately to keep others from asking questions. Long hallways with no conversation. Chandeliers over rooms nobody used. Every surface polished until it reflected the person walking past, which meant nobody was ever quite alone in Blackfang, even when they wanted to be. The servants hated him by morning. Not loudly. Blackfang people didn't do loud. They did tight smiles that stopped before reaching the eyes. They did trays left outside the door instead of brought in. They did conversations that stopped the moment he turned a corner. The guards were worse. They watched him the way men watch things they've been told to distrust but haven't been given clear reasons yet. Waiting for him to confirm something. The two younger Draeven brothers made their position clear without words. Xander, the middle triplet, stood in the hallway outside the medical wing on Kaien's second morning at the estate. He didn't block the path. He just stood there with arms crossed and watched Kaien walk past with clean bandages for nicks. That was enough. Message received. Soren, the youngest, said 3 words total in the first week. All 3 were variations of, "Why is he still here?" Kaien didn't answer. He didn't answer anything. That was the part they all misread. They took his silence for submission, for fear, for weakness. What they didn't understand yet was that Kaien had learned long ago that the most useful thing about being underestimated was that no one ever watched carefully enough. He watched everything. The way the night kitchen staff left one corridor unlocked after midnight. The way the security rotation skipped the eastern gate between 2:15 and 2:40. The way Nix's food bowls sat untouched even after handlers swapped it twice in one day. He watched Vaelor too. Not directly. Nobody looked directly at Vaelor Draeven if they wanted to keep the interaction short. But in reflections. In the movement of people around him. The way rooms reorganized themselves when he entered. The way conversations shifted register. The way even the brothers adjusted their weight. Vaelor never adjusted. He moved through his own estate like a man who had already decided how everything inside it would end. By day 4, Nix would eat from Kaien's hand. Nothing else. Not the premium cuts the handlers brought in stainless steel bowls. Not the medicated food the estate physician left twice daily. Just Kaien, crouched near the enclosure gate with whatever he'd managed to prepare, and the wolf pushing himself upright with effort to reach through the bars. The handlers reported it. The servants talked. By evening of that same day, one of the older housemaids, gray-haired woman named Petra who'd worked the estate for 11 years, stopped Kaien in the corridor outside the linen room. She didn't look angry. She looked tired in the way people look when they're about to say something they'd been holding for a long time. "You should know something," she said. Her voice was low. "About the last person the wolf trusted." Kaien waited. Sometimes the most powerful question you can ask is nothing. Petra glanced down the hallway in both directions. The last person the wolf trusted. She paused. Disappeared. The child appeared on a Thursday. No announcement. No escort. Just a small figure sitting on the bottom step of the staircase that connected the servants' quarters to the main hall, arms wrapped around both knees, eyes tracking every movement in the corridor like he was counting exits. He was maybe 7 years old. Small for his age. Dark skin, close-cut hair, a bruise fading yellow at his left temple. He wore clothes 2 sizes too large, and the shoes on his feet were adult-sized slippers someone had probably found quickly. He didn't look lost exactly. He looked like someone who had been in too many strange places to let a new one make him react. His name was Elio. Kaien found out from the kitchen boy who brought firewood every morning. Elio was the son of a housemaid named Dara who had died 3 weeks earlier. Accident, the official story said. The unofficial story lived in the silence around that word. Dara had worked the estate's Eastern archives. She had filed documents nobody was supposed to touch. Now her son sat on the staircase at 6 in the morning, and apparently nobody had decided yet what to do with him. Kaien sat down on the step beside him. He didn't speak, he couldn't. He didn't offer food or a hand or a reassuring look. He just sat there on the cold marble step, close enough that the child could feel another body nearby, far enough that there was no pressure in it. Elio looked at him sideways. Kaien looked at the corridor wall. About 8 minutes passed. Then Elio slowly released one knee and let that foot touch the floor. It wasn't much. But it was a decision. They sat like that until the kitchen boy came through with the firewood cart and gave them both a strange look. Kaien stood, and Elio stood at the same time without being asked, and they walked together toward the eastern courtyard in a silence that felt like the beginning of something. Nix was awake when they arrived. The wolf raised his head, assessed Elio without hostility, and then lay back down. That was the closest thing to a greeting Nix gave anyone. Elio stared at the wolf through the enclosure bars for a long time. His hands gripped the metal. His breathing was controlled in the way children control breathing when they're trying not to cry. Then he said quietly, to no one in particular, "He looks like he's been waiting for someone to notice he's hurt." Kaien looked at the boy. Elio didn't look back. He was still watching Nix. From the upper corridor window, Vaelor Draeven stood with one hand braced against the frame. He had been on his way to an 8 o'clock call with regional advisors. He had stopped walking 4 minutes ago. He watched the mute Omega and the orphan child sitting together in the wet courtyard beside his dying wolf. Something moved in his chest that he had no name for. He was still standing there when the call was already 3 minutes late. That evening, Elio found Kaien in the narrow corridor outside the eastern storage room. The child had something in his hands. A small drawing on torn paper, rough lines, a child's sketch. A wolf behind bars. A figure standing outside. Circles that might have been people, or might have been something else. Kaien crouched down to his level and looked at the drawing carefully. Elio pointed to a figure in the corner. Dark marks around its hands. Then he pointed to the wolf. "I saw someone hurting him," Elio said. His voice was very quiet. Almost nothing. Kaien's expression didn't change. But his hands went still on the drawing. Elio looked at the door at the end of the corridor, then back at Kaien. "The man with the silver gloves," the child said. He swallowed. "He said the wolf needed to die next." Altered. The medical log for Nix dated 6 weeks back had been altered. Not obviously. Whoever did it was careful. Dates shifted by 48 hours. Dosage amounts written in a slightly different ink pressure than the surrounding entries. Kaien had to hold the page at an angle under the lamp twice before he was certain. He was certain now. He set it down on the floor beside the others. 3 logs. 2 supply requisitions. one internal transfer order for estate medical inventory. All of them had the same problem: numbers that didn't add up when placed beside the actual physical stock. Medications present in the storage room that weren't logged. Medications logged as delivered that didn't appear anywhere on the shelves. Someone had been running a second supply line into Blackfang's eastern wing. Quietly. Carefully. For months. Kaien worked through the night. He moved through the estate during the window between 2:15 and 2:40 when the eastern gate rotation paused. He'd clocked it for 5 consecutive nights before he trusted it. He had no tools. No official access. Just attention, patience, and the particular skill of someone who had spent a long time learning how to find information in places people assumed were safe. The surveillance footage was easier to notice was missing than it was to explain. The eastern wing cameras had a 6-hour gap that repeated every 11 days. Not a malfunction. Malfunctions had error codes in the system logs. This had no error code. It had a clean timestamp skip, the kind that happened when someone with administrative access manually cleared a segment. Forged signatures appeared on 2 transfer documents. The name signed wasn't the actual estate physician's. Close, same first initial, similar last name. The kind of forgery that passed in a stack of papers nobody was examining carefully. Kaien photographed everything with a device he'd found in the estate library's lost property box on his 3rd day. Nobody had noticed yet. That was the other skill. He was good at not being noticed. Vaelor Draeven noticed. Not what Kaien was doing, not specifically. But he noticed the pattern of Kaien's movements. The hours. The corridors. The fact that the mute Omega, who was supposed to be confined to the eastern residential wing and the wolf's enclosure, kept appearing in other parts of the estate at times that didn't align with any assigned purpose. He brought it to Vaelor on a Friday morning. "He's moving through restricted areas," Vaelor said. His voice was controlled but the tension in his jaw wasn't. "At night. Alone. No authorization." Vaelor sat behind his desk. He hadn't looked up from the document he was reading. "I know," he said. Vaelor stopped. "You know. He's been doing it since his 4th day here." Vaelor turned a page. "He hasn't taken anything. He hasn't contacted anyone outside the estate. He hasn't tried to leave." The silence in the room had edges. "You're watching him," Vaelor said. "I'm watching everything." Vaelor finally looked up. "That's not new." What was new, though Vaelor didn't say this, was that he'd started reviewing the Eastern Wing footage himself. Every morning. Before the briefings. He told himself it was security protocol. The document in front of him was a toxicology breakdown from the estate's private lab. Results from a sample Kaien had collected from Nix's injection site 5 days ago and left on the medical tray without explanation or label, just placed there, with the sample correctly sealed, correctly dated, and tagged with the specific notation format the estate lab used. Format that was only in the official procedural manual. A manual stored in the restricted section of the Eastern Archives. Vaelor looked at the lab results again. The chemical compound in the sample matched nothing in Blackfang's approved medical supply list. But it matched, exactly, a compound flagged in a federal seizure report from 4 years ago. A report attached to the investigation of an underground pharmaceutical operation that had been running illegal biological testing across 3 northern states. Kaien had found that too. He'd left a copy of the seizure report in the same envelope as the sample, folded underneath it. No note. No signature. Just the information. Vaelor sat with that for a long moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a photograph from the estate's archive, one Soren had found while processing Dara's old filing boxes. He looked at it again. A younger face. Same eyes. Standing at the edge of a facility courtyard that no longer existed. And beside him, unmistakably. A black wolf. Young. Unchained. Not yet scarred. Kaien Vael had been inside that facility. Years before Nyx was ever brought to Blackfang. It came back in pieces. That was how memory worked after a certain kind of damage, not in full scenes, not in order, but in sense. Smell first. Cold metal and antiseptic and something underneath it, organic and wrong, like flesh kept too long in a sealed room. Then sound. Not voices, machines. Rhythmic. Monitoring something. Then the sensation of a surface beneath him that was never soft, always hard, always intentionally so. Kaien sat with his back against the enclosure wall and Nyx pressed against the bars beside him, and the memory came in during the quiet hour before dawn when the estate finally stopped pretending to sleep. He remembered a number. Not his name, they didn't use names. A number. Written in black marker on a white band around his left wrist. He'd been small. Young enough that he didn't fully understand what the facility was, only that he was inside it, and the inside had rules, and breaking the rules had costs that were paid in precise and clinical ways. He remembered the other children. Rows of narrow cots in a room that was kept too cold. Boys mostly. Some younger than him. Some older. All quiet in the particular way children go quiet when they've learned that sound draws attention, and attention in that place meant someone was coming to do something to you. He remembered the wolf. Not fully grown. Still large, larger than any dog Kaien had seen before that. Black. Chained near the loading bay at the north end of the compound. The wolf was used for something. He didn't understand exactly what as a child. But he remembered slipping food through a gap in the chain link during the periods when the handlers rotated out. And the wolf not growling. Just eating from his hand carefully, like it understood that this was something that required gentleness from both sides. He remembered the day they moved him. The facility. The children. All of it, relocated in one night. He'd woken up somewhere different with no explanation and no record of where the previous place had been. The wristband was gone. New number. New room. He never saw the wolf again. Until now. Kaien pressed his forehead against the cold steel bar. Nyx shifted, pushing his weight against the other side like he was trying to close the remaining distance. The crest had been the trigger. He'd found it 3 days ago in an old supply manifest tucked into the back of a medical storage cabinet. A silver serpent coiled around a vertical rod. A pharmaceutical company logo. He'd seen it before in a context he couldn't immediately name, and then his hands had started shaking and he'd had to sit down on the storage room floor for 20 minutes before he could stand again. The same crest. On the facility walls. On the white coats. On the packaging of every compound brought into that compound, the ones used on the children, and the ones used on the animals. Now it was on Blackfang's incoming medical supply records. Someone had been using the same supply chain. The same network. Different location. Years later. Still running. And the compound in Nyx's bloodstream, the one Kaien had identified and flagged for the lab, was a modified version of something he had seen administered to children in that facility. He knew the effects. He had experienced some of them. Slow accumulation. Neurological confusion. Immune collapse over months. Designed to look like natural deterioration. Designed to leave no obvious cause. Vaelor found him at dawn. He didn't announce himself. Kaien heard the shift in the courtyard sound pattern and knew before he looked up. The Alpha Kings stood outside the enclosure, dressed like he hadn't slept, expression controlled but with something behind the control that hadn't been there in their earlier encounters. He held up the photograph. Not accusatory. Not threatening. Just held it up so Kaien could see it, and waited. Kaien looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he reached into the front pocket of his shirt, and pulled out the facility crest he'd cut from the supply manifest. He held it up the same way. Vaelor looked at the crest. His jaw moved once. "How many facilities?" he said. Kaien held up 4 fingers. Vaelor's expression didn't collapse. Men like him didn't let expressions collapse in open air. But something behind his eyes changed permanently. He looked at Kaien's face. Really looked. For the first time without the filter of suspicion or surveillance or strategic assessment. Then he said, "When did you leave?" Kaien looked down at his own wrist. The inside. Where the band had been. Where the skin still held a faint discoloration that most people never looked at closely enough to notice. He held up 10 fingers. Then 5. 15. He had been 15 years old. Vaelor didn't say anything for a long time. The sun was coming up over the eastern wall. Pink and gray light over the stone courtyard. Nyx exhaled slowly against the bars. Somewhere in the upper wing, Elio was probably awake, probably sitting at the window the way he did every morning, watching the light change. Then Kaien's hand shot out and grabbed the bar. His body went rigid. His eyes closed. He was on the ground before Vaelor could cross the distance, not violently, just gone, folded down like every muscle released at once. His hand had landed on the supply crest as he fell, pressing it flat against the stone. Vaelor was through the enclosure gate in seconds. He turned Kaien over. Pulse present. Breathing shallow but steady. Eyes moving rapidly behind closed lids. Nyx pressed close, low sounds in his chest, anxious. Then Kaien's hand moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Even unconscious, or almost unconscious, his fingers formed shapes. Vaelor had learned 3 words of sign language in his life. He didn't need more than the one Kaien repeated. Twice. Then a 3rd time. The same sign. Alive. 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 Vaelor looked up from the courtyard floor at the pale morning sky above Blackfang Estate, and for the first time in longer than he could account for, he felt something he hadn't planned for. Fear. Not of the Empire. Not of rivals. Of what Kaien's hands were telling him. They weren't just alive. Whoever built that facility, whoever ran those experiments, whoever had been slowly killing Nyx for months while hiding inside Blackfang's own supply chain. They were still out there. And based on the chemical compound in Nyx's blood, they had been inside this estate recently. Very recently. Kaien's eyes opened. Dark. Focused. Directly on Vaelor's face. His hands moved one final time before the light in his eyes dimmed again. Not alive. Something else. 2 signs. Fast. Urgent. Still here. Vaelor Draeven missed 3 meetings in 4 days. Nobody said anything out loud. That was the Blackfang way. You noticed, you filed it somewhere private, and you kept moving. But the staff felt it. The advisors felt it. The security rotation felt the change in how he moved through the estate, faster in some hallways, slower in others. Stopping at corners he had never stopped at before. He stopped sleeping. Not fully. He slept in fragments, 2 hours, then awake. An hour, then awake again. His body knew something his mind hadn't formally accepted yet. Threat assessment ran on its own schedule, and his was running constantly now. The compound in Nyx's blood matched an illegal pharmaceutical network. Someone inside Blackfang had opened the door for them. That meant every person on the estate was a question he hadn't finished answering. He interrogated 3 supply coordinators the first night. Quietly. In the Lower East office where sound didn't carry. He was precise. He was controlled. He was the kind of frightening that didn't need volume because the stillness around him did the work instead. 2 coordinators gave him nothing useful. The 3rd one started crying before Vaelor finished his first question. not because of anything Vaelor did. Because the coordinator had already been threatened by someone else first. Vaelor sat with that. Meanwhile, 2 floors up, Kaien was teaching Elio how to sign the alphabet. They sat on the floor beside the eastern window with the afternoon light coming through gray clouds, Kaien shaping each letter slowly with his hand, waiting while Elio copied it. The child's brow furrowed with concentration, small fingers working through shapes that didn't come naturally yet. Nyx lay stretched near the corridor entrance, watching the door. Guard behavior. Positioning. The wolf was getting stronger. Not fully. Still slower than he should have been, still carrying weight in his movements that wasn't muscle. But he lifted his head when sounds changed. He tracked people in rooms with purpose now instead of exhaustion. Vaelor watched all of it on the security feed. He watched Kaien adjust Elio's hand position gently without rushing. Watched the child laugh at himself when he got a letter wrong. Watched Kaien's expression stay patient. Not performed patience, the real kind, the kind that costs something to maintain, and costs it willingly. He watched for 40 minutes. Then Xander walked into the surveillance room without knocking. "You're watching him again," Xander said. Vaelor didn't answer. "Vaelor." Xander stepped closer to the monitor. His voice dropped. "I'm not questioning your judgment. I'm asking you to tell me what you know so I can help protect this estate. That's all." The silence stretched. Vaelor stood. Turned off the monitor. "Pull the full financial records on Remington Hale," he said. Xander went still. Hale was Blackfang's senior political advisor. 22 years with the Empire. The man who had managed every significant alliance negotiation across the Northern Network. Present for every major estate decision for over 2 decades. "Hale," Xander repeated. "Everything. Accounts, travel, outside communications. Go back 7 years." Vaelor moved toward the door. "Don't tell Soren yet." Xander grabbed his arm. Not a power move. A worried one. "How long have you suspected him?" Vaelor looked at his brother's hand on his arm. "Since Kaien left a flag supply manifest on my desk without being asked," he said. He left. That evening, during dinner in the main hall, Nyx lifted himself upright from his sleeping position across the room and moved, slowly but deliberately, toward the head of the table. Not toward Vaelor. Toward Remington Hale. The wolf stopped 3 feet away. And growled. Low. Sustained. The kind of sound that predates language, the kind the body recognizes before the brain catches up. Hale's face stayed smooth. That was the tell. Because every other person at that table had already pushed their chair back. Vaelor noticed the stillness in Hale's face and filed it in a place where he kept things he planned to use later. Elio's drink sat untouched at the far end of the table. Later, one of the kitchen staff would find residue at the bottom of the child's cup. Not from tonight's meal. From the afternoon. Someone had gotten to the child's food before dinner had even started. The gala invitations had gone out 6 weeks before anyone knew there was a crisis. Now it was the night of the event, and every car coming through Blackfang's iron gates carried someone Vaelor needed to manage carefully. Politicians with pending favors, mafia heads with territorial stakes, media executives who could either protect or destroy the Empire's public image depending on which direction the wind moved. None of them knew what was already happening inside these walls. That was exactly the problem. Kaien stood at the edge of the east corridor in borrowed formal clothes, plain, fitted, nothing like the tailored statements everyone else wore. The clothes were too formal for the servant wing but not formal enough for the main hall, and that in-between quality suited the position Vaelor had assigned him for the night, present, but not introduced. Visible, but not explained. That was the plan. Vaelor had said very little when he told Kaien he needed him at the gala. 2 sentences. "You'll be near me. Stay close to Nyx. That was enough. The wolf moved on a reinforced leash beside Kaien. Stronger than usual, calmer than expected, scanning the crowd with slow, deliberate sweeps that made guests give the pair a wide berth. The room was all crystal and candlelight and expensive restraint. Conversations ran in layers, what was said on the surface and what was actually meant underneath. Everyone smiled. Everyone was watching everyone else's hands. Kaien read the room in 90 seconds. 3 guests were already watching him specifically. Not with curiosity. With recognition. That mattered. He kept moving. Xander found him near the eastern gallery at 40 minutes in. His expression said everything before his mouth opened. Soren found the financial records, Xander said low. Hale has been running a secondary account through a holding company in the eastern states for 9 years. The amount. He stopped. Recalibrated. The amount is not small. Kaien looked across the ballroom toward the center table where Remington Hale stood with a glass of champagne and the particular ease of a man completely certain he was in control of everything around him. Hale felt the look. He turned. And he smiled at Kaien. Not warmly. The way someone smiles when they want you to know they already have a plan for you. Then Cassiel took the floor. That was the part nobody had planned. The middle Draeven brother walked to the center of the room with the kind of calm that meant a decision had already been made and everyone else was about to find out what it was. He picked up a glass. Tapped it once. The room quieted. I want to address something, Cassiel said, that several of our guests have already been asking about privately. His voice was even. Practiced. There is a person in this estate, currently in this room, whose background I think our allies deserve to understand. The room's energy changed. Vaelor, across the hall, went completely still. Cassiel described the illegal facility network. Not all of it, just enough. The experimental programs. The children. The Omega subjects. He framed it carefully, every sentence technically accurate, every omission strategically placed. He didn't name anyone in the Empire. He let the room draw its own conclusions about how such a person had ended up inside Blackfang. The conclusions arrived fast. Whispers spread from table to table like lit paper. Kaien stood at the edge of the room while a ballroom full of powerful people turned to find the face that matched the story. He didn't move. His hand was on Nyx's leash. His breathing was controlled. His face gave them nothing to work with. That restraint, that absolute refusal to perform distress for an audience, is what saved the room from tipping into something worse. Because people expecting a reaction and not getting one have to sit with their own cruelty longer than they planned. A woman near the east table said something that got a laugh. Kaien looked directly at her. Just looked. She stopped laughing. Vaelor was already moving through the crowd when the screens activated. Every display surface in the ballroom, for large projection screens installed for the evening's presentation, lit up simultaneously. Footage. Internal. Blackfang internal. Supply manifests. Transfer records. Annotated chemical logs. A recorded conversation with audio, a voice most people in this room recognized, discussing compound delivery schedules, facility contact names, and the deliberate misdirection of estate medical records. Hale's voice. Unmistakably. The champagne glass in Hale's hand cracked. Not broke. Cracked, from the pressure of his grip. Vaelor stopped walking in the center of the room. He looked at the screens. Then he turned and looked at Kaien. Kaien looked back. And shook his head once. He hadn't done this. Someone else had accessed the system. Someone else had chosen tonight. Before Vaelor could process that, a guard pushed through the service entrance at the far end of the hall, face stripped of all professional composure. He went directly to Vaelor's ear. 3 words. Vaelor's expression didn't change. But his hand went to his jacket. Elio was gone. The ballroom fractured. Not all at once, in pieces, the way structures fail. First the guests nearest the screens pulled out phones. Then the media executives near the back started toward the exits. Then 3 of the mafia-affiliated delegates stood simultaneously, which caused their security teams to stand, which caused Blackfang's security to shift position, which caused the whole room to suddenly feel like a held match near dry paper. Vaelor moved through it without touching anyone. He was at Kaien's side in 40 seconds. "Tell me you know where he is," he said. Kaien already had his hands moving. Fast. Not the careful signing he used with Elio. Urgent. Compressed. The facility. The abandoned one. He signed the name, not a word, a shape. A specific motion he'd created for it because it had no official name anymore, just a location in his memory that his hands knew how to point to. Vaelor looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. "Can you get us there?" Kaien nodded once. They left through the east service door. Soren was already in the corridor, coat off, weapon visible, expression like a thundercloud that had already decided what it was going to strike. "Cassiel tipped hail," Soren said. "I pulled the internal message log. 40 minutes before the gala started." Vaelor kept walking. "Where is he?" "Don't know yet." "Find him." Xander appeared at the junction of the east and north corridors, phone to his ear, ending a call. He looked at Vaelor and said, 3 vehicles left through the north service gate 20 minutes ago. Unlogged. One of them matches the description of a car registered to a holding company under Hale's secondary account. That was fast. Too fast for improvisation. Hale had been ready for this. Which meant someone had told him the timeline. And that meant the leak inside Blackfang went deeper than one advisor. Nix moved ahead of everyone without a command. The wolf's nose was low, moving in a straight line through the estate grounds toward the northern tree line with the focused economy of something that had already solved a problem the humans were still calculating. Kaien followed without hesitation. Vaelor followed Kaien. The others fell in behind. The facility was 12 minutes from the northern edge of Blackfang's property. Technically outside the estate's official land, technically on abandoned industrial land that had been purchased through shell companies and left unregistered in public records for 11 years. Kaien had found the address in the supply manifests 3 weeks ago. He had memorized it the way you memorize emergency exits. Just in case. Just in case had arrived. The building was long and low and dark when they reached it. A converted agricultural storage structure that had been modified inside, if you knew how to look, with the particular care of people who needed functional space that looked abandoned from the outside. One light visible through a panel near the eastern wall. Nix stopped at the door. Turned back. Looked at Kaien directly. Something passed between them. Then the wolf sat. Waited. Kaien pressed his palm flat against the door. He looked at Vaelor. Vaelor looked at the building. "How many rooms inside?" he said. Kaien held up 7 fingers. "Which one?" Kaien pointed left. Then 3 fingers down. "Third room on the left corridor." Vaelor checked his weapon. "Stay behind me." Kaien shook his head. "That wasn't a suggestion," Vaelor said. Kaien pressed his hand against his own chest. Then pointed at the door. His expression said everything his voice couldn't. This was his place. His memory. His history embedded in every wall inside that structure. Vaelor could protect the perimeter, could control the exits, could handle Hale's men, but the path through that building belonged to Kaien because he was the only one who had walked it before and survived. Vaelor held the stare for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded. They went in. The inside smelled the same. That hit Kaien like a physical impact, antiseptic, cold metal, something organic underneath. He didn't stop moving. He couldn't afford to stop moving. But his hand found the wall briefly and pressed flat against the cold surface, and the contact steadied something. Third room on the left. The door was closed. Two of Hale's men were in the corridor. They went down quickly, efficiently, without significant noise. Vaelor opened the door. Elio sat in the corner, knees to chest, arms around himself. Awake. Unharmed. Eyes wide. He saw Kaien first. The child moved before anyone else did. Crossed the room and hit Kaien's chest with the full force of a 7-year-old who had been holding everything together by himself in a dark room for 2 hours. Kaien's arms closed around him immediately. Solid. Still. Present. Elio shook for about 30 seconds. Then he stopped. The way children stop when something they needed finally arrives. Hale was in the fourth room. He wasn't alone. 2 men, documents being loaded into a bag, a transport clearly in preparation. When Vaelor walked through the door, Hale looked at him with the particular expression of someone who had prepared multiple contingencies and was running through them in real time. "This isn't what you think," Hale started. "Remington." Vaelor's voice was almost gentle. "I've known you for 22 years. Hale stopped talking. "That's why," Vaelor said. "You're going to tell me every name on that network. Every account. Every facility. Every contact. Pause. All of it." The 2 men with Hale looked at each other. One of them reached for something. Soren was faster. It was over in about 45 seconds. Hale sat with his back against the wall and his hands in front of him, and for the first time in the years Vaelor had known him, the man looked genuinely afraid. Good, Vaelor thought. But what came next, that was the part that would decide everything. Because buried inside the document bag they'd been loading were files Vaelor hadn't seen before. Files on victims. Names. Numbers. Medical records. Photographs. Over 200 individuals across 3 years of active operations. Vaelor opened one folder. Then another. Then a third. He stopped at a photograph inside the third folder. A child. Maybe 9 years old. Dark hair. Eyes that already carried the specific damage of someone who had been in a controlled environment long enough to forget what normal felt like. He looked at Kaien in the doorway, holding Elio. Then back at the photograph. He already knew. But the confirmation sat in his chest like something heavy dropped from a height. The most dangerous systems survive because good people convince themselves silence is temporary. He told himself the Empire's money went into infrastructure, into political stability, into protection for the northern territories. He had never looked closely enough at where the money actually flowed. He was looking now. Cassio found them an hour later, standing outside the facility in the dark. He came on foot. No security. Hands visible. He stopped 10 feet from Vaelor, and didn't say anything for a while. Then, "I thought covering it once would end it." His voice was stripped of everything except the words. "It didn't end. It just moved." Vaelor looked at his brother. "I know," he said. "I should have told you." "Yes." No warmth in it. "Not yet." "You should have." Soren stood to the side with his arms crossed and an expression that said he was going to need significantly more time before he had anything to add to that conversation. Xander was already on a call, voice low, working through containment. Elio had fallen asleep against Kaien's shoulder. The child's hand was loose around a fold of Kaien's jacket, fingers relaxed in sleep. Kaien stood in the cold night air outside the facility that had held part of his childhood, and watched Vaelor across the dark space between them. Vaelor was looking at the documents again. Then he closed the folder. He walked toward Kaien slowly, and when he stopped in front of him, he did something nobody at Blackfang had ever seen him do before. He went down on one knee. In the dirt. Outside the building. In front of everyone still standing there. He looked up at Kaien's face. I need to know how to fix it, he said. Not the facility. Not Hale. All of it. Every name in those folders. Every person his empire's money had funded without his full knowledge. Kaien looked down at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a folded list. The list had 47 names. Survivors. Kaien had been building it since his third day at Blackfang. Pulling fragments from memory, cross-referencing them against supply records, matching initials against the estate's older document archives. Not all 47 were confirmed alive. But all 47 were real. All 47 had been through at least one of the 4 facilities he remembered. He handed it to Vaelor without ceremony. Vaelor unfolded it. He read it standing in the dirt outside the building that had housed his political advisor's secondary operation, with one hand holding a folder of evidence, and the other holding a list of people his empire had failed. He read every name. It took 6 minutes. Nobody spoke. When he folded it back, he put it in his inside jacket pocket, not in the folder with the other documents. Separate. Personal. We move tonight, he said. Xander looked up from his phone. The full exposure? That burns every alliance we spent 12 years building. Yes. Political fallout will. I know what it will do. Vaelor's voice was steady. Set it up. There was a version of this where Vaelor handled it quietly. Privately. Made deals in back rooms to dismantle the network without it reaching public record. That version was cleaner for the Empire. Faster. Less damaging to the alliances the Draeven brothers had built across the northern states. That version left the 47 names in a folder. He chose the other version. By 2 in the morning, the evidence had been packaged and transmitted: victim files, financial records, internal communications, the audio footage from Hale's meetings, the compound documentation, the supply chain maps tracing back to active operations still running in 2 separate states. Transmitted to federal investigators. And to 3 independent journalists with verified track records and no Blackfang connections. Both simultaneously. No controlled release. No managed narrative. Everything. The kind of move you can't walk back. The kind of move that ends careers and empires and doesn't ask permission first. Xander stood beside his brother after the transmission confirmed. You know this comes back on us, he said. Not accusing. Just naming it. Yes. The investors who funded the original programs. Some of them are our current partners. Yes. Vaelor. I know. He looked at Xander fully. We built on top of something wrong and called it foundation. That's not foundation. That's debt. He paused. It's time to pay it. Soren, standing across the room, uncrossed his arms. That was the closest he came to agreement that night. Cassiel sat in a chair by the window and said nothing. He had covered the wrong thing at the wrong time and spent years convincing himself the cost would stay manageable. The cost had walked through Blackfang's front gates in torn shoes. The public response hit before dawn. Fast and hard and impossible to manage even if they'd wanted to. Federal agencies moved on 2 active facilities within 6 hours of receiving the files. Arrest warrants surfaced. The holding company connected to Hale's secondary accounts froze. 2 of Blackfang's political partners quietly dissolved their formal ties within the first 12 hours. The estate felt it like a structural shift. Staff who'd worked there for years moved differently. Conversations happened that hadn't happened before. Some people left. Some stayed. Vaelor held press access to the property. He didn't hide. He stood in front of cameras on the estate steps the following afternoon with no prepared statement, and no communications team, and answered questions directly for 41 minutes. He didn't minimize. He didn't redirect. He said the Empire's financial structure had funded operations he had not fully investigated, and that failure was his own. He said the 47 names on file with federal investigators represented an obligation the Draeven estate intended to meet. He said the network was not fully dismantled yet, and the work was not finished. He said it the way people say things when they mean them and aren't asking for approval. Inside the estate, Kaien watched the press coverage on a small screen in the Eastern Library. Elio sat beside him, legs swinging over the edge of the chair, eating something from a small bowl and watching the screen with the focused attention of a child who understood more than most adults gave him credit for. Nyx lay stretched across the floor in front of them. Not chained. The enclosure doors had been left open that morning. The wolf had walked out, crossed the courtyard, climbed the eastern steps, and settled in front of the library fireplace with the air of an animal completing something long overdue. Kaien watched Vaelor on screen. Watched him hold the press line without flinching. Without performing certainty he didn't have. Without the particular armor of powerful men who'd rather look invulnerable than be honest. Elio looked up from his bowl. "Is he going to be okay?" the child asked. Kaien looked at the screen for a moment. Then he signed slowly. "Yes." Elio nodded like that settled something. "Good," he said, and went back to his bowl. The rescue operation for the first confirmed survivors from the active facilities began 72 hours after the evidence release. Kaien worked with the federal case team directly, not as a witness. As a source. Someone who had been inside. Someone who knew how the facilities were structured, where records were kept, what terminology meant what in the documentation. He communicated through an interpreter and through written notes and through Vaelor, who sat beside him during every session without being asked to and without leaving when the questions got difficult. That mattered. The team lead. A federal investigator named Marcus Delacroix told Vaelor privately after the third session that Kaien's structural knowledge had compressed what would have been a months-long investigation into weeks. Vaelor didn't relay that to Kaien. He didn't think the work needed that kind of accounting. But one evening after the session ended, when Kaien was standing at the window watching the federal vehicles move through the estate grounds, Vaelor stopped beside him. He didn't say anything for a while. Just stood there. Then, the list. "How long had you been building it?" Kaien held up 3 fingers. 3 days. Vaelor absorbed that. "From memory?" Kaien nodded. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that happens when two people have stopped needing to fill space and have started actually being in the same room as each other. Vaelor looked at the side of Kaien's face. "You walked into an empire that hurt you," he said, "and the first thing you did was try to protect the wolf." Kaien looked at him. "The second thing you did was document every crime you found." Kaien held his gaze. "You never asked me for a single thing." Kaien looked back at the window. He signed one word. Vaelor didn't know all the signs yet. But he'd been learning. Quietly. On his own. He'd started the night Kaien collapsed in the courtyard and he'd stood there helpless, unable to read the urgency in the man's hands. He understood this one. Enough. Vaelor looked at the estate grounds. The vehicles. The investigation ongoing. The Empire in the middle of its most significant public reckoning in its history. "No," he said. "Not enough." He said it quietly. Just to the window. Just to the room. But Kaien heard it. Snow came to Blackfang on a Sunday. Light first. The kind that falls sideways in the wind before it decides to commit. By morning it had committed, steady even, covering the courtyard stones and the empty enclosure, and the long eastern path in the particular quiet that snow makes when it means to stay. The estate felt different. Not transformed. Not healed in some clean movie way. Just different. Quieter in the right places. Louder in others. The kind of different that comes after something long overdue finally breaks open and the air gets back in. Elio discovered snow for the first time. That was the sound in the eastern courtyard at 7 in the morning, a 7-year-old in oversized boots standing in the middle of the white-covered stone with both arms out and mouth open, catching flakes, completely unconcerned with how he looked. Nick sat beside him, watching with the expression wolves reserve for things they've decided are their personal responsibility. Kaien stood at the edge of the courtyard with a coat someone had left outside his door. Good coat, heavy wool, no tag, watching Elio spin in small circles. He wasn't smiling exactly, but his face was open in a way it hadn't been when he first arrived. Vaelor came down the east steps at 7:15. He had a meeting at 8. He always had a meeting at 8. The Empire was in the middle of a restructuring that would take months, maybe longer, and every day brought a new decision about which alliance to rebuild and which to let stay broken. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looked at the courtyard. Elio spotted him and ran over without warning, grabbed his hand, and tried to pull him toward the snow with the fearless presumption of children who have decided someone is safe. Vaelor let himself be pulled. He stopped a few feet from Kaien. The morning was quiet enough that the snow made audible sound, soft landing, steady rhythm. Vaelor looked at Kaien. Kaien looked back. No grand declaration. No formal moment. No accounting of everything that had moved and broken and reformed between the night a thunderstorm brought a bound stranger into a wolf's enclosure, and this Sunday morning with snow in the air. Just the two of them standing in it. And Elio running back toward Nyx, announcing something in a loud voice about how snow tasted different than water, which Nyx acknowledged by standing up and shaking himself thoroughly. The meeting at 8 was late. Nobody commented on it. The estate moved through the morning in the way things move when they are not yet finished but are no longer in crisis. With purpose, with occasional noise, with the particular rhythm of a place trying to figure out what it is now that the old shape has broken. Remington Hale was in federal custody. The network's 2 remaining active operations had been shut down within the week. Federal investigators were still processing the full scope of the financial trail. That would take time. Significant time. Some of it would come back on Blackfang. Vaelor had been told to expect it, and had said simply, "Let it." Cassio was still at the estate. He and Vaelor had talked once, late by themselves. What they said stayed between them. Soren still hadn't fully extended anything warmer than professional cooperation toward his middle brother, but he was working on it in the deliberate, slow way that Soren did everything. Xander had surprised everyone. He was the one who quietly arranged for 3 of the confirmed survivors on Kaien's list to have legal representation and housing support within the first month. He didn't announce it. Just did it. That was its own kind of answer about who he was turning out to be. The federal case team had formally requested Kaien's continued cooperation through the investigation phase. The request used careful language. What it meant was, "We need you to stay." Kaien had read the request once. Put it down. Didn't answer for a week. On the 8th day, he picked it up again. He sat at the Eastern Library desk with Nyx's head on his feet and snow falling outside the window, and wrote his response by hand. 1 sentence. "I'll stay." The pen hovered over the paper after he wrote it. He hadn't planned to feel anything when he wrote it. He felt something. Later, standing at the window while snow fell on the courtyard below, he tried to name what it was. Not safety exactly. He knew enough about the world to understand that safety was a thing you built in layers over time, not a thing that arrived whole. Not happiness. That word had always seemed too large and too simple for the spaces in between things. Something smaller than both of those. Something like, here. He was here. Not running. not waiting to run, not calculating exits or memorizing schedules or holding his whole self at a slight angle from every room he entered. Just here. In this window. In this coat. With snow outside and a wolf asleep on his feet and a child down in the courtyard convincing Vaelor Draeven to catch snowflakes on his tongue. And Vaelor, standing at the far edge of the courtyard, looking up at the window. Kaien didn't move away from it. He stayed where he was. Let himself be seen. That was the most terrifying thing he had done inside Blackfang Estate. More than the investigation. More than the facility. More than standing in a ballroom full of people who wanted him to break. Just this. Standing still in a window. Not hiding. The snow kept falling over Blackfang. And for the first time in longer than Kaien could count back to, the place didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like the beginning of something he hadn't let himself want. Not perfect. Not promised. Just possible. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing of all. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Kaien's silence, or Elio's trust, or even Vaelor's decision to choose truth over comfort, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Stories like this one exist because people like you keep watching, keep sharing, and keep showing up for stories that matter. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more stories like this one coming, stories about strength, survival, and the kind of love that builds slowly and holds. You never know which story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Share this one. You might not know who needs it, but they'll know.